The Crusades, the infamous series of religious wars between Christians and Muslims over control of the Holy Land, were among the most impactful events of the Middle Ages. But just what exactly were they? And why do they matter today? Let's find out in 10 minutes! The year is 1095. Pope Urban II is addressing the First Council of the Lateran. After a lifetime spent suppressing heresy, excommunicating rival popes, and generally being a total badass, Urban is ready to settle down a bit and relax on his laurels. And what better way to do that than by calling for a holy war to seize Jerusalem from the infidel Muslims? Well, he might have put it slightly more eloquently than that, but you get the idea. The result was the First Crusade, which lasted from 1095 to 1099. But hold on. If these were supposed to be wars over the Holy Land, how did the Muslims get there in the first place? Well, it's a long story that begins with some guy named Muhammad. Now, if you know anything about Islam, then this should ring a bell. Because Muhammad is kind of a big deal in that religion. See? Before Islam, the Arabian Peninsula was basically a tribal area with no real central authority. There are some big regional kingdoms like the Kingdom of Kinda, for example, or the Lakhmids, who actually ruled over parts of modern-day Iraq and Jordan. But when Muhammad came around preaching his new religion in the 6th century CE, the whole region was ripe for the taking. In only a few decades, Muhammad and his followers conquered the entire Arabian Peninsula under the banner of Islam. At the time of his death, in 632 CE, his empire stretched all the way from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. It was huge. But after Muhammad's death, his empire fragmented into several different caliphates. The one we're concerned about here is the Abbasid Caliphate, which was centered in Baghdad and lasted from 750 to 1258. Its importance here is that during its early centuries, the Abbasids were obsessed with expanding. As such, they took their religion with them wherever they went, spreading Islam to new populations across North Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia. Eventually, Muslim armies pushed into Spain in the west and reached the Indus Valley in the east. That's a pretty huge chunk of land. But even though the Abbasid Caliphate had greater territorial control than any previous empire in history, it wasn't really built to maintain that much territory. Not only were the vast majority of its subjects ethnically and religiously diverse, but the Abbasids also lacked a standing army. Instead, they relied on local governors to raise irregular militias whenever they needed them. And when they lost interest in those regions, they often abandoned them completely. And that's how the Byzantines ended up with Muslim neighbors along their Syrian border. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering why the Byzantines did unjust to kill all those Muslims instead of putting up with all that caliphate nonsense. And the reason is pretty simple. Because the Byzantines themselves were strapped for cash. During the reign of Basil II, the Byzantine Empire entered a golden age characterized by economic prosperity and cultural vibrancy. However, by the mid-11th century, the empire's treasury was bone dry thanks to a combination of bad harvests, high taxes, and military overspending. So unfortunately, Basil could neither afford nor organize a massive campaign to kick out the Muslims. By the time he died in 1025, the eastern border had become an international incident. But other than sending a few letters asking them to leave, the Byzantine emperors could do little about it. For the next 150 years, the Byzantines and the Abbasids maintained a tense peace until suddenly, in 1095, Pope Urban II called for the First Crusade. Alright, so we know why the Muslims were there, but why did the Christians want to kick them out? Well, the short answer is prestige. The longer answer is money. You see, although the Byzantines weren't doing so hot economically, the Latin Church back in Europe was flush with cash. In fact, the papacy had grown into a major landowner in central Italy. Part of this was due to donations from awestruck pilgrims who visited Rome and wanted to show their devotion to God. And part of it was due to donations from terrified Italian nobles who paid the Pope to absolve them of their sins after committing a little light plundering. Either way, the church had a lot of extra resources, and it wanted to use them to spread Christianity. And that's where the Muslims come in. Spreading Christianity was expensive. Building new churches, funding missionaries, and defending them from angry locals required a lot of investment, especially if you're working in notoriously stingy places like the Byzantine Empire. But what if you could find somewhere that was already Christian but had fallen under the control of an enemy power? Then you wouldn't have to spend any money converting people. You would just have to spend money kicking out those enemies and restoring Christian rule. Sounds efficient. The popes weren't the only ones with this bright idea either. The French king Philip I was eager to assert his influence over the Holy Roman Empire. And what better way to do that than by leading a crusade into the east and seizing some territory? Even the common foot soldiers were enthusiastic, as becoming a crusader was a great way to escape a life of poverty or crusaders enjoyed tax breaks, noble rank, and most importantly, the indulgence, which was essentially a get-out-of-hell-free card for those who died during the crusade. This last benefit led many to believe that crusading was a sort of suicide mission, which isn't too far off the mark, considering how many crusaders died from disease or starvation. So, with the go-ahead from both the secular and religious authorities, the French began training an army. By 1096, there were 40,000 men ready to march. Before setting out, however, they made the mistake of electing a leader. That man was Godfrey of Bully, a duke who had been unable to acquire any real power in France, so he figured becoming the king of Jerusalem would be a nice consolation prize. Meanwhile, the actual king of France, Philip I, decided that he didn't want to lose such a powerful vassal, so he tried to stop Godfrey's departure. Unfortunately for him, Godfrey and his men ignored him and headed straight for Constantinople. After a 16-month journey filled with infighting, starvation, and disease, the Crusaders finally arrived. Emperor Alexios Komnenos, whose family had founded the Byzantine Empire, was not happy about this. Not only did he have no say in the matter, but he also didn't like the Crusaders. They were unwashed, undisciplined, and given to pillaging, which was bad news for his hard-won peace with the Seljuk Turks. Still, Alexios welcomed them and gave them supplies, hoping that they would rescue his beleaguered empire. He did not get what he was expecting. In the end, the Crusaders ignored the Byzantines' pleas for help and marched straight into Anatolia. Along the way, they pillaged cities, slaughtered Armenians, and nearly starved to death again. Only a handful made it to Jerusalem. And after sacking the city, Godfrey was proclaimed its first king, making the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem in 1099. From there, the Crusades continued for another 200 years, resulting in 3 additional Crusader states in the Levant, 2 of which lasted for centuries. But that's gonna have to be another video. Crusades may seem like a thing of the distant past, but their legacy continues to resonate today. The Crusades played a significant role in shaping European identity, both by fostering a sense of unity among Western Christians and by creating a lasting image of the European as a force for good. Or, if you prefer a darker view, the Crusades also inspired some of the worst atrocities in European history and left a deep-seated legacy of Whatever your perspective, it's clear that this obscure corner of medieval history still matters today. Hey, everyone! Thanks for watching! If you liked this episode, please hit like and subscribe for more historical tales. See you next time!